So welcome everyone. We've got another wonderful program today for you in our student career series. Wilson Sonsini is bringing us a real interesting view on privacy and cybersecurity and how those practices vary among clients, among firms, and among regions. That's something that's not naturally intuitive. Why does privacy vary among regions? But there are specialties in certain regions. So with us today, we have Maneesha Mithal from Wilson's DC office. She's a partner there. Interesting, we'll talk as a lateral partner. And Kelly Singleton, who is also in the DC office. She's a senior associate and a lateral associate there. So adds a little bit to, I think, especially in the privacy area, how privacy has developed over the last 5 to 10 years is this new practice group and the opportunities that were there a few years ago and what the opportunities look like going forward for students. Also, we'll focus on what's the difference between privacy and cybersecurity. Most law firm websites just kind of put that phrase out as one phrase. Turns out maybe they were a similar practice 7, 8 years ago. Now, not so much. They are related, but independent areas of expertise. Just like you'll see in a lot of law school classes. Now there's a cybersecurity class that matches the privacy law class. So with that, I would love a quick introduction from both of you, just what your background is, and maybe a little bit of how you got to where you are in your career.
Sure, Wayne. So I'm happy to start out. As you mentioned, I'm a partner in the DC office of Wilson Sonsini. I joined the firm about 2 years ago after a long career in government. So I was at the Federal Trade Commission, and we at Wilson have a number of partners who came from the Federal Trade Commission, and a lot of work that we do specializes in FTC investigations. So the FTC might send a CID, which is an administrative subpoena, saying, hey, tell us about your data privacy practices, or you had a breach, or there was some story in the news. Please tell us more. And we represent clients in those investigations. So in terms of my journey, so again, as I mentioned, I spent a career in government, and I was looking to leave the government to come to the private sector about 2 years ago. And I looked at a number of firms, East Coast, West Coast, different specialties. And I think I ended up settling on Wilson for really 3 reasons. The first is the incredibly diverse client base of tech companies. I was very interested in tech. As you look at different firms, some specialize in banking, some specialize in energy. Wilson Sonsini specializes in tech. So I was very interested in the tech clients, but not only just the tech clients, but the range of tech clients, from small startups to those that are about to become public, to large companies like Google and TikTok. So the client base was number 1. Number 2, the fact that the firm had a world-class privacy and cybersecurity practice. As I mentioned, I had some former colleagues from the FTC here. When I was in the government, I had the opportunity to see a number of opposing counsels from different firms across the country, and I'd been very impressed with Wilson's practice. And number 3, the other reason I came to Wilson was because of the racial, ethnic, gender diversity, and really the commitment to diversity that this firm has. Has a number of programs like the 1L Diversity Summit, number of affinity groups at the firm, and I was just very impressed by this firm's commitment to diversity. So that's how I ended up here, and happy to drill down further into practice, but I'll turn it over to Kelly to talk a little bit about her experience.
Thanks, Maneesha, and thanks for having us today, Wayne. Kelly Singleton. I am a senior associate in the DC office of Wilson Sonsini. As Wayne mentioned, I did transfer over to Wilson as a lateral during my first year at a firm. So I, after law school, went to a plaintiff's class action firm. I kind of focused on privacy and technology, but for a number of reasons, I found the firm wasn't a great fit for me. I think litigation was not really something I found that I wanted to do after having done it for a few months. And so I kind of wanted to explore something else, moved back to DC, and kind of talked to my contacts in the area and asked them what they thought, would be a good move for me. And 2 of my mentors who I spoke to recommended that I check out Wilson Sonsini. They knew the head of our group. She's a former FTC official, and they knew that kind of she ran a great firm here at Wilson. And so interviewed with the firm, loved it, and have been here ever since. So you know, really happy at the firm. As Maneesha mentioned, the tech client base has kind of been a huge draw, working on really cutting edge issues all the time with you know, robust, well-established tech clients, and also the early stage tech clients, which is super interesting. And also I've kind of found this niche that I love, which is the regulatory work that Maneesha mentioned, which I think is a good balance of, you know, diplomatic and political and policy oriented, but also really, you know, it has the advocacy piece that litigation also has, just in a little bit of a different flavor.
So I would love to follow up on this a little bit more, because I don't think the regulatory side of privacy law is something that's talked about in law schools, not a career path that's top of mind, at least here on the West Coast. When people think about privacy, I think more transactional privacy, maybe more class action litigation, things like that. So kind of at a high level, Kelly, can you kind of lay out what career paths or what choices somebody might have when they're looking at privacy career options? I mean, are they all, you pick privacy and you do all three of them automatically, or do you tend to pick firms or practices or maybe geographies based on what you want to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's really hard to know when you are in law school what the different options are and what those look like on a day-to-day basis, and how they're similar and different. So I got a good flavor of this because in law school, I worked in the government. I worked at kind of nonprofits and advocacy groups. I worked at think tanks, and you know, kind of got a sense of what that side of working in privacy was like. So that was much more policy oriented. So, you know, you're not dealing with kind of real kind of factual, complex factual scenarios, and kind of having to apply the law to those facts and advise a client on how to address those issues. We were more focused in the work that I was doing in law school in the government and at nonprofits on trying to make broader policy changes. So, you know, drafting letters to companies or to organizations, trying to kind of put forth ideas on how to change the laws, or how to, you know, what policies to implement. So kind of higher level type of work that wasn't really as practical and in the weeds as we get, you know, at the firm. Now, in terms of firm choices, I think there's a lot. So there's the route that I went initially, which is, you know, plaintiff side class actions, where you're doing litigation, and you're doing it on the plaintiff side, so you're representing consumers. And, you know, that kind of looks a lot like your legal research and writing class. So, you know, writing briefs, doing discovery, a lot of that kind of stuff is your day-to-day. So kind of civil procedure and legal writing combined is what the litigation looked like in my experience. And then, you know, working at Wilson, I have a completely different practice. So primarily I do these regulatory investigations where we, you know, defend companies against primarily investigations brought by the Federal Trade Commission. And so what that looks like, it's similar to the litigation. You're kind of dealing with discovery, you're responding to requests for information, for documents, but you're also doing kind of broader strategy as well. So negotiating settlements with the government, helping clients figure out how to position themselves in kind of the best light to have a good outcome from the investigation or from an enforcement action. And then we also do a lot of compliance work. So just kind of what I mentioned at the outset, a client comes to you, they want to launch an app, they want to use a new kind of category of information to, you know, improve their product. And it's kind of like a law school exam, a traditional law school exam, where you're issue spotting, you're kind of having to provide high level advice on the fly for a bunch of different issues that may be presented by the complex factual scenario. So, there's all those different pieces that it's kind of hard to see, how those things kind of exist at different firms. But I think what I've found is firms do different things within those buckets. So there are some firms like Wilson where we have a really robust regulatory practice. And why is that? It's because the head of our group and other kind of high, partners in our group are former FTC officials, right? So our group naturally does a lot of regulatory work. We also service tech clients, so naturally we do a lot of the compliance work as well. And so I think if you look at the leadership at a firm and you look at the client base, you're able to see what kind of work the firm and the group in the firm may focus on within those different buckets of what I mentioned is kind of available to law students who may be interested in working in privacy.
So if I pick those three buckets up, students should be looking for, you've got the regulatory bucket, the compliance bucket, and then the litigation, the classic district court, state court litigations. Now, what I heard is you do the two of the three now and not the litigation. Is that typical, or do people do all three anymore, or are people pretty much separated into one or two of those buckets at a time?
Maybe I can take that one, Wayne.
Yeah.
So I think Kelly, you're exactly right. Kelly is focused on the regulatory and the compliance buckets. I think if you look at the Wilson privacy practice as a whole, I think there's a number of verticals within the privacy practice. We talked about regulatory, we talked about compliance. You mentioned transactional privacy. So we have a group within our group that does due diligence on transactions. So one company is acquiring another company. What do their data practices look like? What does their compliance look like? Or we're representing a private equity firm that wants to make an investment into another company, similar, do that due diligence. So that's what I would call the transactional privacy vertical in our group. So that's number 3. Number 4 is cybersecurity, incident response, helping companies develop cybersecurity policies, addressing incidents, reporting to the SEC or other government agencies when necessary, and providing advice on breach notification. And then the last one I'll mention is EU and global privacy. So we have a team in Brussels, and I would say it's probably the largest EU privacy team of any firm out there. And so again, when I was looking at firms, I said, okay, which firm has kind of this holistic practice that has a number of buckets? And I think I found Wilson Sonsini was one of them. Now, Wayne, you mentioned litigation. Now, obviously, a lot of data breaches or privacy actions or government regulatory actions may go to litigation. And we have a separate practice group that addresses litigation. So litigation practice group does all of our litigation, whether it's privacy or IP or breach of contract. And so I think it's beneficial for law students who are saying, you know what, I'm really interested in privacy, but I don't necessarily want to do litigation. I think Wilson is a great option for those people. So I think we've kind of, there's a number of threads that from Kelly and my remarks that I think people can get. Number 1, make sure that you are talking to mentors. Kelly talked to mentors and deciding to come to Wilson Sonsini. I think that's really important. Make sure that if you're interested in a career in privacy, that you're looking for opportunities in privacy. So Kelly mentioned internships and work with nonprofits and other think tanks and organizations. I think that's a great way to get exposure to what privacy practice looks like as a whole. And then the final thing is kind of asking these types of questions. What is your main client base? What are the verticals you have within your practice? What are associates expected to do and spend their time on? I think those are all questions that people can ask. And I think it's just a whole different world from the world it was when I graduated from law school in the 90s, when privacy wasn't a practice, let alone having these cybersecurity and transactional and compliance and regulatory buckets. I think there's a lot of choice within privacy. And I think the more students can be informed, I think the better choice they'll make when they graduate. And then just the final thing I'll say is that I think it can be hard, particularly as a 1L, when there are required courses. And it's really after 1L year that people are doing OCI and interviewing with firms. So it's hard to demonstrate interest in privacy. And I think that's where the extracurriculars, the jobs, the kind of, statement of interest, the, papers, the other activities people can do to show a real interest in privacy will help them get a leg up in interviews as they're interviewing for privacy positions.
Well, there's a really interesting point. The second time I've heard a firm mention this, and the first time I heard it was in terms of an interview process where a candidate came in, was talking to the privacy group, said, I'm interested in privacy litigation. And the response was, well, you're talking to the wrong people. We're the privacy group. Litigation group handles privacy litigation. And I think that's probably not uncommon, but completely opaque to the average law student, that often litigation groups set as their own world. They're completely separate from everything else, and general litigators take care of everything with some kind of specialty in between. So probably is important when you're coming into interview, whether you're looking at pure litigation type work or more of what you were talking about, the pure privacy verticals, because you can be asking the wrong questions to the wrong person in that kind of case.
Yeah, and I think it definitely pays to do homework. And look, I don't blame law students when they come in as a 1L. Look, when I was in law school, I only thought there was corporate and there was litigation, and those were the only two choices, right? And so I don't blame anybody if they come in and they say, I want to do privacy litigation. I would just explain to them that that's how it works at this firm. Think about, which area you really want to focus on. And we would work with the student and say, okay, well, maybe the privacy team isn't a good fit if you were like born a litigator, or you want to just do discovery and write briefs in federal court. Then we might say, okay, why don't you talk to our partners in the litigation group? And I don't want to suggest it's so siloed, right? So we work together with our litigation teams all the time. And if one of our investigations, for example, were to go to litigation, then I think we would have people from our group help to staff that, because they would be the subject matter experts and they would really know how to advise clients in certain situations. So again, what I would say to law students is, don't sweat it if you don't understand the nuanced differences between practices at firms. But I think watching a video like this can really help you get a leg up. And it is very impressive when you do understand that.
So one of the other things I want to bring up here, I spent most of my life working in Silicon Valley, in the tech industry, and there are a few names in the Valley that are synonymous with tech, and quite frankly, we're the legal backbone of developing, the modern tech infrastructure. And one of the questions that I hear students ask, well, this firm is enormous in this location. What does that mean elsewhere? Now, places like Wilson have grown well beyond their roots of being a Palo Alto firm. But what does that mean to be in the DC office, the privacy group, or the New York office, or you've probably got about 18 of them now, or one of the California offices? How does that affect your career options, your work options, your mentor options, which are often maybe more important than anything else, who your mentor will be? What would you tell a student for Wilson, and what would you tell a student in the privacy space, if that's somehow different?
Yeah, so I can start, and Kelly can chime in, but I think that this is definitely one of the things that attracted me to Wilson is that it was a California firm. It had that Silicon Valley base. It had that kind of startup client base, as I've discussed, and frankly, it has that California vibe, right? Which is a little more laid back than maybe like a DC or New York firm, and I really like that about Wilson. And I almost feel like working in the DC office of Wilson is the best of both worlds for my practice, in the sense that we get a lot of work, a lot of clients, a lot of referrals from the Palo Alto office. But at the same time, we're in DC, and we almost feel like a boutique law firm within a larger law firm. And so we're a smaller group within a big firm. So So as people are thinking about it, I would encourage people as they interview to ask questions. If they're interviewing in the headquarters office, what is the interaction like with other offices? If they're interviewing for a satellite office, what is the interaction like with headquarters? And I think that you're going to get a different answer depending on which firm you're talking to.
And maybe a different answer based on which practice group
Yeah, absolutely.
you're working with.
Yeah.
Some are much more local than others.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the answer probably to your question has probably changed post-pandemic. We in the privacy group, we have almost equivalent numbers in DC and in San Francisco. And so, and in Brussels. And we have somebody in Austin, we have somebody in Seattle, we have somebody in Colorado. And it just makes it much more seamless post-pandemic to collaborate, and that's the norm. The answer may have been different 5 years ago, but that's what I observe now.
And just kind of one thing to add to that, I think, looking at where the firm's headquarters is versus where their national offices are is one thing to think about. But another thing to think about is, where is the group that you're interested in kind of based? So whereas, we are a Palo Alto firm, most of our team is in DC. I think that, like Maneesha said, that's changed a bit over the years. We're now kind of more evenly distributed between West Coast and East Coast and other offices. But when I first started at the firm, 6 years ago, most of our group was in DC, and that was kind of considered to be the home base of the group. That's where the leadership was. And so, in a sense, the DC office was kind of the center of the group. So, I think that also is something to consider. It's not just where the firm's headquarters is, but also where are most people in the group based as well.
So one of the challenges for any law students looking at the privacy practice, actually most practices, is their information comes from law firm websites. And I think law firm websites are designed to convey absolutely nothing. Having been responsible for helping design the website of my old firm, they're meant to convey anything you want to read into them. Because they're really for clients, not for law students. Now, Wilson does a better job because they have their own special website with the information designed for law students. Not very few firms have anything like that, but it's hard to look at a practice area. I go back and look at my old bio, and man, I was really good at a lot of things. But I spent 95% of my life doing patent litigation. I'm like, I didn't know I did those other things. Somewhere marketers got a hold of things and put things in because they did one case at one point in time. Almost impossible to do meaningful research. How would you help the average student that's taken privacy classes, really liked the work, as they come in and start either interviewing or at networking events where they start meeting privacy attorneys? What questions would you tell them to ask so they can better understand, one, what you do, how you spend your time as individuals, and help them as students understand what they might like to do going forward?
I can start. So I think that you're absolutely right. I think that it's very difficult for law students to get a feel for a practice based on websites alone. I mean, I do think that we at Wilson, we put out something called a data advisor blog. So it's wsgrdataadvisor.com, which is a blog of privacy developments. And so I think sometimes you can compare different law firms' blogs and see kind of how they write, how they analyze. You can get a sense of the level of formality. And so I think that might be a good source of information as you're going into an interview. In terms of what questions to ask at the interview itself, I think, getting a sense of, and I think particularly, what is your day-to-day like? How much of your day do you spend on compliance versus regulatory? Or can you kind of walk me through a day? I think that's the best way. So if somebody's interviewing me as a partner, I think it's great when they say, like, what does your day look like? I think the more important question is, what would the day of a first-year associate or summer associate look like? What kinds of things that, would you need help on? I think that is probably the most important question to ask. I think, asking questions about client base and, what else that, about the culture of the firm. I think that's all fair game. But I'm gonna turn it over to Kelly. Kelly, I think, is closer to this, so Kelly might have more tips.
I agree with all of that, Maneesha. I think the other thing that I really think is kind of revealing, like I mentioned earlier, is looking at who the partners in the group are at the firm. So like I said, a lot of our partners are former FTC officials. That's revealing because it shows that, we have an expertise in FTC investigations. If you look at other big firms that have pretty robust privacy practices, the head of their group may be a litigator. That may suggest that they're going to do more of the litigation. Same with transactional work. If the head of the group is an M&A lawyer, they may be working primarily on, transactional work, or, cybersecurity, same thing. So I think that can be really revealing, as well as the client base, like Maneesha said. And I agree with Maneesha. I think the question, and I do often get this question from law students, of what is your day-to-day, which, can be challenging because it can vary so much. But I can tell you what my day-to-day looks like, and then also tell you that someone else in my group's day-to-day is going to look very different than mine for a number of reasons, whether it be level or, the specific issues that they may have experience with and I don't, and vice versa. And so, not just talking to one person in the group, but talking to multiple people in the group and seeing, what differences you see and what similarities you see in what they say about their day-to-day will give you a good broad picture, I think.
So that's a really good point that the two of you make. And Maneesha, I appreciate your point that partners maybe aren't the most relevant person to ask for many reasons. But I would hear students ask me when they were interviewing, what's your day look like? Why would that matter to you? You won't see this for 20 years, hopefully. The most important person you're interviewing with is a senior associate, period. They have the wisdom and the experience of seeing multiple years, being able to put everything together, but they haven't become, in the case of old litigation partners, jaded, or so far away from the day-to-day of a second year that they have no idea what you're going to do as a second year or how you get it done. I used to say, it's magic around here. I say, I need this, and it shows up. And, the associates I would work with would roll their eyes, but no, I appreciated what they did. But the point is, Kelly's the person you should be asking day to day. What does your day look like? How's it changed from a few years ago? And the number one thing I tell students is, if they won't let you interview associates, you need to ask why.
Well, and I would even go further as to say that, sometimes I'll hear that, like, oh, the applicant is, like, kind of putting on, their game face for the partner, and then, like, not treating the associate interviews with the same level of importance. But I would say it's really the associates that are key to these hiring decisions, and that law students who ignore their interviews with the associates do so at their peril.
Maybe they're doomed. That's my standard process through my entire career was, I never expressed my opinion until all the associates on the team expressed theirs, because you never wanted to sway anything. And that was probably, I gave a presentation on this, the number one reason we didn't hire laterals, number one reason we didn't hire summer associates, was because they were different to partners and associates. Yeah, just don't need that kind of person. So
yeah, and at the same time, if you're a law student, do you want to be the kind of firm that doesn't pay attention to what its associates say? Right. And so having kind of and I remember when I interviewed, the head of the practice group said, oh, I'd love for you to meet with some of our associates. I just thought it was such a great sign that that she cared what the associates thought, and not every firm offered that.
Well, Kelly, you didn't know this was all going to be about you, did you? But I'm glad you brought the point up. You're right. Not every firm does that. Many firms think the partners are important. They don't affect the day-to-day life of a 1L, other than the way Kelly was saying, is if the emphasis at the person up top or all the people up top are litigation or FTC, it does show you where the focus of the group might be. But those individuals probably won't be your day-to-day mentors, unless you find yourself in an office that only has one or two partners and maybe one or two associates. Maybe things are a little different, but it's always worth asking.
Yeah, I think it's also worth asking about mentorship. I mean, I think that's a great area of focus, and I think it's very telling. So, our law firm, for example, we assign a partner associate a partner mentor and associate mentor. And I think asking about what kinds of mentorship opportunities there are at the firm, I think that's a great question, and it can elicit meaningful information for the candidate.
So really, one of the last questions I want to ask is about geography, because we talked a little bit about being a firm that started out here, but no longer is necessarily associated with just out here. It's really global in its views. But obviously, your privacy group has two big U.S. centers. But what happens if you want to do privacy in the Austin office? You've got family, you're going to go back home. What happens there? Was that a good idea if you're not in a center of, I guess a center of gravity? Because this question, I think the answer is different possibly now than it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, I would say as a general matter, I think we would be hiring in San Francisco or DC in the United States or Brussels. Now, that's not to say that, if there was some extraordinary circumstance, we wouldn't consider the other offices. But I think for the privacy practice at Wilson Sonsini, we really are looking for DC or San Francisco in the United States to start.
And it seems that firms are usually pretty good about indicating which geographic areas they want for which practice. So what I hear you saying is if a firm tells you that and they're going to make an exception for you, you better explore why and how that will work, because maybe they don't have all the safeguards for mentoring and development set up for you.
Yeah, I think it would be probably a less than ideal experience to start off where you're the only person in our group in a city.
So give the two of you the last word. I appreciate this. I think this will be enlightening. Anything else you'd like to add for students?
I guess the only thing I would add is that, I think it's a great firm. It's a great practice. Not for 1 second or 1 minute did I regret my decision to come here. And everything that I was told in interviews really has panned out. And so I think there's a lot of joy and enthusiasm about our practice and in the group. And I think partly it's because privacy is such an interesting area, right? There's issues of first impression. As I said, it hasn't been around for more than 20 years. And legal issues of first impression are coming before the courts daily. And I think that's what makes it an exciting practice, and particularly here at Wilson with our client base and amazing team.
And on the team point, that was actually the thing I wanted to highlight, which is, all of these things we've been talking about today are super important in choosing, which law firm you decide to apply for or go to. But I do think at the end of the day, what I'd say is the most important thing that keeps me at Wilson, that makes me enjoy my job, is the people that I work with. And so, pay attention to kind of the demeanor and the attitude of the people that are interviewing you when you're interviewing with firms, because those are the people you're going to spend your time with. And, being a lawyer is difficult, but it's much easier to do if you're surrounded by people who support you, who are there for you, who are team players, who, don't have sharp elbows. And that's something that our group has really tried to be mindful about when we hire people. because we want to preserve that kind of collegial, collaborative environment that has kind of always been the way of our group. So I think I would highly recommend that you not only focus on kind of the name of the firm or the practice area or the specific disciplines, but also the people at the firm.
Well, I want to thank both of you. I know you're busy. This takes you away from your day, and sometimes students don't recognize that, for practicing lawyers, you give up an hour of your day. That's an hour a day from something else you wanted to do. You still have the same amount of work to do. You just gave up vacation time or reading time or family time, and you did that to help students, whether they choose Wilson or not. You help students try to make a better decision. I tell them, I love my career. I had a great time. I had some days that I probably made me regretted being a lawyer. As a litigator, you're probably going to have some bad days. But I love my career because I worked with great people. I worked with a great firm. And I had absolutely no regrets. But that's because there were some good decisions along the way. I could see it going the other way with a few bad decisions. So I really appreciate the two of you, spending some time to help people make better decisions.
Thanks for
Happy
having
to do it.